morning to all those who have joined this session of DIVE today. My name is Manoj Kothari, and I welcome you from our team from Turin Labs. And speaker today is Mr. Stephanos George Eapen, or we call him George. We are discussing Blue Ocean strategy today, and this is the second session of DIVE, which has gone online. We've been doing these offline sessions so far for past 2 years, and sessions. Incidentally, this started just as an idea that we need to have a single point platform where people can come to and learn, network, and know about something which was that time emerging as a new buzzword called design thinking. Design thinking and innovation was the central idea of DIVE, and we've had several speakers, several workshops all this while. And I can tell you that George was one of the early, one can say, founder participant of these DIVE sessions, and he's been participating very enthusiastically. We are discussing Blue Ocean strategy today with him, and today I see from the participant list, there are pretty diverse list it is going to be, from investment professionals to quite a few CXOs, apart from the students, design practitioners, and strategy professionals, and technologists, of course, being in Pune and otherwise, there are quite a few of them. So we likely to have a great discussion. I'm really expecting this one. So we have around 30 minutes of presentation from George when he starts. Around 30 slides I could see. Pretty interesting story, full of stories from his past experience teaching at INSEAD and working with large corporates like Tata's. So I'm expecting a lot of stories inside, and we'll have around 30 minutes of maybe question answer, and we all can have a good discussion after that. Questions can be posted on your screen. On the right, you have a comment link. If you post a question, it will be visible to me and to the speaker. And then we can have, probably after 30 minutes, we can have a good discussion. So it's a hour-long session, and thank you for being around, and let's start. George, I welcome you on this new platform, going online with DIVE. You're online right now. Over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. And if some people are calling in from other parts of the world, maybe it's good evening. So as Manoj said, I've been going for the live session, the live DIVE sessions for some time. And recently I went on the first virtual session with him, and then we talked about maybe doing this virtually. So a little bit of background. I used to run an executive education program on the INSEAD campus. Introduce value innovation as one of the subjects in the program, which is a long program, and realized that it doesn't happen in a classroom or a boardroom. It's like design thinking. You actually have to go out into the field, observe people, talk to people. And so I turned it into a workshop format, which we did in 2000, the first one. It was still called Value Innovation, which is why I'm still using that as a title, because that's the action part of Blue Ocean strategy. And yeah, and it works. Do you find a blue ocean? No, but not always. But millions of dollars, you do find. So let me start on that. I have to get my screen out. And now I have to do something. Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay. So as I said, value innovation is the action part of Blue Ocean strategy. It started on a couple of articles in 97, 98. The book came out in 2004, has done very well. But the workshop part is value innovation, which is what I'll go through very quickly because we have a lot of slides. And I've chosen video games as a simple way of explaining the process. So traditional is competition, you fight, doesn't always work. And the case we are using is the video game console market. We used to be an old player in the board games. They went into video games with the Space Cube. And then when Microsoft and Sony came, they were overspent and outspec'd. So they had to come up with a new version, a new offering. So this was what it used to be. The machines were $600 odd with amazingly powerful processing cores. I read somewhere that if you strung 8 of these machines together, you had the power of an older generation Cray computer. Very high-res graphics, etc. So what could we do? Because they were losing $100 and $150 per box. And this is what the typical core customer looked like. And this is what happens in a lot of markets. People try and outcompete on specs with their competitors. And they keep adding more and more attributes that usually cost money and focuses the market to a smaller and smaller core. And this is the first tool of Blue Ocean strategy. It's a visual representation of what you offer along the x-axis and how much you offer along the y-axis. And if you look at the two curves between the two competitors, there really isn't very much between them. And if you look at a lot of mature markets, saturated markets, the 3 or 4 players will all look very, very similar. So they had to go and look for other people. And this is who they looked at. And this is a little bit like design thinking. You try and find out from them what they want, why they don't play with a regular console, etc., etc. And they came up with this idea that video games should be fun, not killing people, and for everyone. So what was key? It was to be fun and approachable for everyone. As I was mentioning to Manoj, this is probably a good time for a Wii in the COVID market because everybody's stuck at home playing video games, and video games with a little bit of activity might have been useful. And this happens a lot with Blue Ocean type projects. The established market doesn't take them seriously because they don't compete on the same criteria. So this was what the numbers looked like just before the launch. And this is what happened. And small difference, the Wii sold for about $220. They actually made $50 or $60 per box, and actually more as they went down the experience curve. So very briefly, what's the difference? You compete, very porter, you benchmark, you add more attributes, you focus on the customer, CRM, everything gets you to know more and more about the customer, and you accept common sense of what the industry wants. Blue, and it's usually because you can't compete. You're the 3rd player in the market or the 4th player in the market. You don't have enough money, so you have to find a different way. So it's not outside the box, it's creating a new box. And this is what's critical. You're not on the edges of the business, you're creating a new space. And briefly, you lower cost by removing elements that add cost but not as much value. And this is for the new customers. And this is not always the case, but they tend to cost less and therefore are more approachable. But if you look at, if you think back to the iPhone was not, or even the iPod, it was not sold as a cheap product. but it created immense value. So here's the process. We go through the bits. I'm not going into too much detail because we're running short of time, and we can actually expand on them in the conversation. And this is the core of Blue Ocean strategy. It's not focusing on your customer, it's focusing on your non-customer. I think it was Drucker who said that in any defined space, there are 3 or 4 times as many non-customers that the business doesn't know. So we split it into 4 categories. The current market is your customers or the industry's customers. And by and large, they're happy with what they get. It's like the 2 kids playing with the video games in the earlier slide. The next level are people who are in the market but aren't that happy with it. They find the games too complex. It takes very long to learn how to use it, etc., etc. Then you get people like parents and stuff who say, this is very bad. My kids are not out playing. They're sitting in front of a video game. And you have to remember, when those consoles came out, they had high definition. But most people's television weren't high def. So you had to probably spend another $2,000 to buy a high def television. Now, of course, you can buy it, 30,000 rupees on Amazon. So they're the people who reject it. And then there are people who don't even know you exist. Like the old people you saw in the picture. So how do you find these people? So the first is, and this has a lot of similarities with design thinking, we split the buyer experience cycle into, I've got 6 items, but it can be as long as you want, but then you focus on the ones that actually make a difference. And here I have in the purchase part, an example of Salesforce, that before Salesforce, it was very expensive to get a CRM system. You needed programmers, and the purchasing experience was terrible. Salesforce, one of the first companies that created a SaaS service. So you paid for what you wanted and for how many people. And Salesforce has actually then systematically innovated on, as competition came in, they went further up the value curve. And we link the buyer experience cycle with what we call utility levers, customer productivity. How easy is it to get it? Is it complicated? Is it convenient? Is there a risk, either real or perceived, if you access the business? Is it fun? Is it an image? Does it create status? And of course, now environmental friendliness. Is it, are you carbon negative? Are you carbon free? How do you dispose of the product when you finish? And once we look at these, we plot them against a map. And on the y-axis, you have the experience, the buyer experience, the journey map, if you like. Marketing used this as a customer journey. And along the y-axis, we have the utility levers. And if you examine any product or service, even a happy customer will have some issues. But the utility derived from the product allows him to carry forward. But for somebody for whom, if you talk video games, if you look at simplicity and use, for a novice, that is very difficult. And that's what they did. And risk, is it very expensive? Is it cool, etc., etc. If these are explained in multiple articles. I don't want to go into it because each of these will take a while. And then there is innovation. They're really cool, but are they useful? But I just read Maharashtra Police has bought a whole bunch of Segways and they're wandering around Marine Drive. So how do you recreate this market? We have something called the 6-path framework. You look beyond your actual industry for insights. You look within your industry for strategic groups, which means, is it budget? Is it deluxe? Is it serious? And then you look at why people trade down or trade up. You look at chain of buyers, which is in any transaction, there are at least 3 people involved. There's the actual buyer, there's the payer could be somebody else, and there's the influencer. And in some areas, there are multiple levels. And then no product or services in isolation. What happens before, what happens after will give you ideas to change your offer. And is it an emotional product or is it functional? Now, insurance, for example, it's emotional because you're taking insurance against some sort of future risk. But when you actually have to go and claim, it becomes terribly functional because there are all these issues that you hadn't realized. And then the last one, which is easy and difficult, is time and trends. And these are not things that might happen in 25 years from now. Actually, with COVID now, time and trends is going to be an issue. When is COVID going to end? When can we as companies start thinking of starting again if we're not doing something already? So you look for trends that are known, that are almost definitely going to happen, and will probably affect your market or your customers. And then you work around them. But these are all points of conversation and discussion in the process. And in the conversation, insights are generated that eventually allow you to do this. So I'll go very quickly around what happened with the console market. So this was how they competed, more and more expensive, but we try to look in value, not tech. And then you eliminate things once you've identified who these non-customers were, which is very young people, older people, people who didn't want to bother with how to understand a video game, and you eliminate things. Now, high def means the processor is cheaper, and by doing everything, you need to have a more expensive machine. Quite often, the eliminate reduces complexity and also reduces cost. You reduce some of the aspects that are not that important for non-customers, which brings more people into the market and also reduces cost to some extent. And you raise the fun for everyone. And how do you do it? By making the games more casual and approachable. And when you have a blue ocean idea or a value innovation idea, and if you plot the curve, you actually get a very divergent curve. You see that price is lower, you've eliminated a number of things, reduced a number of things, and you've created something that the main players don't have. But what's important is, even though the Wii was very successful, Sony and Microsoft didn't lose customers. They retained their core customers. And this is what is very key in this whole value innovation, blue ocean approach. You actually bring people into the market that are different. And for a while, the existing competitors don't even realize they're being challenged till they get to the point where there's very complex. Also, people who come into the market with a Wii, which is simple, might want to go eventually to a PS2, PS3, because in the meantime, because of the Wii, the prices of those consoles came down quite dramatically. So you have people, trading up, and then you have people who find that, it's also, the Wii was not terribly successful in India because, we don't have our own rooms with TV. We have to share it with the family. And I don't think the Wii really took off in India. But the concept was very interesting. It did very, very well. They made a lot of money out of it, and it actually allowed Nintendo to remain in the market. Otherwise, they would have died. And this is also what happens when you have dominant players. If you can't compete with them head on, you have to find a different way. And some thoughts. It's never about technology, but the technology is needed. So, for example, in the Wii, they have a little wand that has an accelerometer. That actually came out of the airbags in cars, so a very cheap chip. But it created this ability to move the cursor with hand actions rather than using your thumbs. And I used to do some innovation. I used to do this innovation award things for the CII, and I got involved in assessing startup innovations. And quite often, people had an idea or a technology, but hadn't really thought through of who the market was, how much were they willing to pay, and how much would it cost them. And disruption, it became another buzzword like innovation, started with Clayton Christensen, which is totally different. It actually disrupts. Somebody comes in from the bottom and over time increases quality, and the new people can't compete or they lose the market. I mean, Kodak is one of the classic examples of they didn't want to accept that innovation because the quality wasn't as good and it disrupted their current business. But in the mobile gaming, as I said, the market just expanded. And this is the book on which this was based, came out in 2000, 2004. I was on the INSEAD campus, so I spent a lot of time with Chan and a bit with Renee. And the book's done very well. They have a second book now called Strategy Shift that works you through the process. But this book is a good read, but then you have to put it into action, which is not always evident. But it works. I've done this for almost 20 years all over the world, and I've never had a time when it hasn't generated interesting and tangible projects. So to finish the presentation, just let me give you some ideas about how Blue Ocean strategy will play out in a COVID world. One, and I think this is very critical, it gives you hope, because Blue Ocean doesn't compete, it creates. So basically, it allows anybody who has an idea to try and come up with a new combination. And the second one is actually now getting even more critical. Nobody knows when COVID is over. How do you plan for what you're going to do when the world starts up again, partially or fully? Manoj and I, so I think there's a questionnaire that's been circulated on a lot of LinkedIn about, they looked at the number of Fortune 500 companies about when they think business will start again. And there's a lot of people going out into the first quarter of 2022. So what do you do till then? Another thing on that study was most companies haven't fired their managers. So you have a large number of managers on your payroll who are probably involved in Zoom conferences every day. Can you not think of using them to start, I don't like the word brainstorming, but looking for what would happen if we open in the end of this quarter in 2020 or the next quarter, or will it be later? So you need to start thinking of what you're going to do, and it may not be business as usual anymore. And the other area where this is of use is startups. It's a simple way of validating the value proposition and developing a compelling offer. If you look at the 10 reasons why startups fail, it's quite often because they haven't thought through who their market was, how much those people are willing to pay. And the other aspect is, do you have a strong enough team, or do you just have a technology? So these are issues where the valuation, as you saw in my very rapid presentation, they're not very complex. You can understand the process almost in half an hour. Doing it like design thinking means actually getting out of the classroom or the boardroom. You can't actually innovate sitting around a room with a bunch of Post-its. That's my thing. So I think, and since I talked about startups, I'll show you a couple of slides of something that's happening in France. In 2014, a designer, an innovation consultant called Albin Héral created the Blue Ocean Awards with HEC, which is a top French business school, and the French Department of Business. As you can see, for 2019, they have a whole bunch of sponsors and a lot of partners. And the reason I'm showing you this is because these are the winners since 2015 in various areas. And these are some of the results. It's in all industries. And in 1 to 3 years after winning the Blue Ocean Award, they have multiples of usually 3 and 4, but in the case of FinalCAD, 44. FinalCAD's a bit like, is actually a project management software that fits in, and it's done very, very well, and they've gone international. Nikhil was a easy-to-use credit card, which in 2018 was bought up by BNP Paribas. So this is just to show you that Blue Ocean happens in a number of industries, both B2C and B2B. And it shows that it works. Over to you, Manoj.
Yes, I absolutely enjoyed your presentation. Although I'd seen it offline, still hearing from you, and this, especially in the current times we live in, very lucid and a calm voice explaining and de-jargonizing a complex concept is always welcome.
No, but this is the key. It's not complex. It's actually designed by looking at people. This is what Chan and Renee did. They looked at people who had created new businesses and came up with the idea. And a very key part of this is this exploration part. I mean, one of our early examples was Formula One, which is from the Accor group, Novotel, Sofitel, etc. And the owner of the Accor, the founder of the Accor group, was also the mayor of Fontainebleau. And he one day woke up and said, why aren't we in budget? And market research came back and said, it's fragmented, there's no money, etc. But he's a guy whose autobiography was never take no for an answer. So he sent 7 of his senior managers, including 2 of his sons, on a 2-month exploration saying, go and live in cheap hotels and come back with the solution. And that's how they came up with Formula One, which is, a little bit similar to Ginger, is you strip out all that is not necessary and you only focus on the on the key elements, which was a bed, hygiene, and security. And this is the other thing. When you innovate Blue Ocean, and it's not only for startups, it's for incumbents. You take strengths that you have as an organization and try and turn it. So the Accor Group bought a lot of beds, so they could actually afford to give better quality beds for a cheap offer. So that's another key aspect. Well, I'll shut up now.
All right.
I've used up my 2 minutes.
Questions have started popping up.
Okay.
First question comes from Jahangir Adishir.
Yeah.
So question is, how does one approach the B2B context?
Yeah.
I guess I've also seen this mention of B2B versus B2C occurring, because when we exemplify, B2C is always very quick to catch.
Yeah, but it's easy to catch.
Multimodal situation.
The B2B actually has many more opportunities to innovate, because the value chain is, depending on how upstream or downstream you are, at each of these intersections, there is a transaction. Might not be a monetary transaction, but there is somebody who acquires a service and somebody who pays for the service in some form. So, or you can innovate all along the chain, knowing that the final solution will affect the final the consumer. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm.
In B2B, there are multiple internal B2Cs, if you like. It might be internal. There are channel issues, there are supplier issues, there are raw material. At each of these points, there are possibilities of innovation. Because even a B2B, at the end of the exercise, there is a solution. I mean, if I use an Indian example, Oyo Rooms is actually a B2B solution for small hotels. It actually creates value for the client who wants a cheaper hotel. Unfortunately, Oyo Rooms got involved with SoftBank, and there seems to be a death wish if you get funded by SoftBank, but that's another story. Yeah. And there could be multiple innovations. It doesn't have to be a full blue ocean, but you can value innovate at each of these intersections.
So the connected concept had also come up recently in line with discussing design thinking, was the concept of service design. When you see a complete value chain and you have different touch points to innovate, do you have any take on this versus what you're talking?
It's exactly the same thing. I mean, when design thinking started, it was user design. So you were looking at how do I improve the user experience and the product.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you suffer from the design in your thinking. And now, as it's become, everybody's doing instant design thinking, you have to go deeper. And service design is value innovation in a B2B context, if you like, in some ways. And some of the approaches are probably similar.
Okay. Here is the next question coming. Dhananjay Singh wants to know if there are any examples of implementing Blue Ocean in government or public management or public services. Are there any examples, or how it can be done?
It's been actually done in a number of, there's some cases on how Dubai created a blue ocean. They've done things with the Malaysian government. They've done things with the Singaporean government. It's actually the same thing. It's the final customer of a government service is the people. So how do you improve your process? How do you reduce costs, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many examples. I can't think of it at the moment. But if you go on the Blue Ocean strategy site, they have a whole section on public and public organizations. And it works with NGOs too, because NGOs, their final customer is the perfect non-customer. They actually have access is a problem, affordability is a problem, so you have to really innovate, and constraints actually force innovation.
Do you think this whole idea of just to connect to the public and governance, when we look at the politics, not looking at just the market and the business context, the whole Arvind Kejriwal movement was also a blue ocean in a way?
It was. In fact, I had a good friend, but they kind of lost the plot. But this happens. Even many of the blue ocean ideas cited, and some of the companies I worked with, once they become big, they start taking attributes of large companies. And they feel they don't need to innovate. And by the time they decide to innovate, it may be too late.
So it's not a formula in a sense.
It's not. And also the time, in the old days, right in the beginning of our examples, they took 10 or 15 years before somebody came in. That time is now come down to 4 or 5, and with digital, it'll be much faster. So as an organization, you need to probably keep looking at, into. So even Nintendo, that did so well with that, then slowly started getting more and more Game Boy looking. They have something called the Switch, and now are back in the same space as everybody else. They have small innovations, but they made so much money that they're much more flexible, and people are interested. But
all right.
I don't know if you remember, Pokemon Go was a great opportunity that they couldn't monetize for whatever reason.
Next question is from Reshmi Verma. Are there any Indian examples of blue ocean strategy? I'm sure beyond
there are examples of a final offer that fulfills the criteria. IPL is a classic point. I mean, Lalit Modi didn't go through blue ocean, the process, but he used the attributes of alternative industries. He was a Duke. He used to see football and baseball games, and he saw this whole idea of cheerleaders and making it fast and short. And he also had the ability to transfer his ideas into practice. But it's a blue ocean. People who now they'll have to find a virtual version now. But people who went to the stadium for an IPL or 2020 was not the usual people who went to Eden Gardens for a 5-day match. They wouldn't know a square cut from googly or whatever. They just wanted people like Dhoni to slog the ball across the.
All right.
So it is, and from there, Pro Kabaddi took the IPL idea and turned it into a more local, approachable sport, which has also done very well. So you can learn in adjacent industries, applying some of the knowledge from a successful value innovation or blue ocean, and apply it maybe in an adjacent field. And Pro Kabaddi does that very well.
Okay. Next question is coming from my colleague Sajid, who is also managing this show from the.
And he did it very well, because we had some issues when we were trying 10 minutes before he started.
Sajid is asking, as I think you touched upon in the beginning, because we are also trying to see how this the connection between these two, so to say, sister concepts of design thinking and blue ocean, how do they work out? So he's asking, how much is the emphasis on understanding the mental model of the user or the customer or the stakeholder? Or where does this play out in blue ocean strategy?
Well, in the front end, while you're, without going too much into empathy, you have to understand why the person is choosing not to be in the space you want to go into. The other thing is we have something called fair process, which requires you to be very clear. And I think fair process is going to become a major issue in the post-COVID world. People are not going to accept business as usual. They need explanations of why an organization or a government is doing what they do, and they have to feel that they have some say in the matter. And both Blue Ocean and design thinking allows a lot more people to get involved in the ideation than a normal process in most organizations. And once you're, and just nothing, in a lot of my workshops, I found that middle managers, who are usually left out of many of these conversations, actually have the best ideas, because they have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, which is either explicit or tacit, and have never had the opportunity to bring it to the fore. Blue Ocean, because it starts with very visual tools, allows everybody to get in the conversation. And I've had a lot of workshops where I've had people saying, I didn't think I was creative. I've never thought. And top management in final presentation saying, hey, our people are really good. Why do we use consultants? Which is a good and bad thing, that that top management only realizes through an event like this that they actually have very good people in their organizations. And which is how consultants have worked very well. They talk to all the middle managers and then turn it into a PowerPoint slide.
Sometimes these workshops also give a sort of a channel to the tacit knowledge of these middle managers.
Tacit knowledge. Middle managers, I have a colleague at INSEAD who wrote a paper in the Harvard Business School, The Challenge of the Middle Managers. And quite often middle managers are seen as blockers, but they're actually translators of information in the organization. So they know what's happening at the bottom, they know what's happening at the top. Mm-hmm. But they're never really allowed to be on the top table. Mm-hmm. And a workshop like Blue Ocean Strategy allows them to come to the fore. And yeah.
There is a next question from Parth Jain. He's asking, how about value innovation, especially in a sensitive area like healthcare, where the context is highly defined? Is there a chance to do something or think
Well, all the affordability issues in healthcare can be looked at because many of the problems are actually access. And there's a lot we're doing, there's a lot of now, with digital, there's a lot of things people are realizing they don't actually have to see a doctor. With the COVID, companies are now creating medicalized home care with tests and protocols. So you don't need to come to the hospital where they don't have enough beds. And studies show that, for a lot of people, COVID doesn't kill you. You suffer a lot. But if I think I read somewhere, all you need is an oximeter, which is non-invasion, that shows you the level of oxygen in your blood, which costs some. And I think some of the packages actually rent you the equipment. And you can actually manage your symptoms better than sitting on your own. So there's going to be a lot of innovations. There's going to be more innovations. If you can't actually go out, you have to find another way to do it. And this is where Blue Ocean and design thinking will have, we'll have to have PPE to go and see the people to understand the customer, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity. I mean, the sensitivity is data protection. So you have to, find ways of anonymizing data if you want to use digital and data analytics to identify things. But I remember doing something with Wipro many years ago where they'd actually come up with a little box that had all the tests necessary for a health auxiliary. They also realized when they went into the market that the health auxiliary spends most of her time filling in forms. And they created a custom tablet that allowed them to do that so they could spend time. So innovations existed, whether you call it blue or yellow or green. It's when people go into the field, they actually learn.
That's a central proposition of design thinking as well.
Design, yeah. No, and one of the companies that I assessed for the CI innovation was Bosch. They came up with Bosch is a foundation, and they try and do some projects that are good for the people. They identified that, I don't know if you know this, that 1 in 3 blind people on the planet are Indian, and they're not in cities. So the Bosch team spent 2 months with Arvind Eye Care, looking at the situation. They created the problem statement and came back with a solution, which was one of the big issues if you're not in a city is to look at the fundus of your eye. You need to dilate the eye, which means you're out of commission for 3 hours or 4 hours. So imagine you're in a village and you have to come. So they created a high-res camera that took a picture of your eyeball. The flash dilated your eye for that microsystem. Initially, they sent the data to a base hospital, and then slowly found that problems can be categorized in 7 or 8 areas. They created an AI solution that actually did the triage, and it's become very successful. But initially, Bosch was not in healthcare. They were just making stuff. And now they've decided healthcare and they've got a whole number of products where they use their ability to innovate in product design to help people. And some of these are high-tech solutions. And some of these are non-invasion. They have a little, which is probably the same as the oximeter, a non-invasive test for anemia, which is another big Indian. And as you innovate, you get more ideas. I'll stop talking now. They realized from the camera, you can actually identify diabetes by examining the eyeball. So they've created a protocol to, you don't have to take a blood test. You don't have to take blood. You just take a picture of the thing and you see whether you have all those micro ruptures.
Retinoscopy, I think it's called.
Yes. Yeah, but this is part of this very simple, looks like a hand drill, has a picture on it. If anybody's interested, there are lots of YouTube videos on it. And
it's coming from a friend of ours, Vikas Malhotra, is asking, who is head of an IT company. And if you wish to bring the culture of blue ocean strategy in the organization, how does one percolate it down to each level in the organization? How does it one bring the change of mindset, especially in the IT company where everyone is so coding focused down the line?
Yeah.
Or is it only for the top line managers to think through new oceans?
Little story, I was talking to the head of a major IT company and talking about what the process did. And she said, George, I really don't need them to innovate. If they talk to each other, that'll already be a big thing. But I have worked on, so you do a blue ocean session with 30. Now with virtual you can have as many, and they take it down 1 or 2 levels with their immediate teams. And since the process is relatively simple to understand, it can percolate down. And as the organization finds that the ideas have value, it creates its own energy. So it's a fairly simple way of percolating it through an organization. And then, there's all kinds of, I find that innovation, blue or otherwise, is very linked to leadership. So I have done workshops where I work with a leadership coach or use a leadership system or something like strengths, so that, teams form, teams have to work. Actually, innovation is a very good leadership development process because people have to actually interact and break out of the rules to some extent, like, create a new box. Yeah. And it also fits in, because of our eliminate, reduce front end, it fits into the frugal innovation story too, because we start by reducing cost before we add cost to create better value, which is frugal innovation, not Jugaad, frugal innovation.
All right. So hopefully, Vikas got his answer. And there is
And
a
you can reach out to me. You have my email, so I'm not exactly running around at the moment.
and maybe we can take probably one last question. Is Shriya Gupta is asking, how does one analyze or study that there are? How can we analyze those symptoms that this company probably can have a possibility of a
Blue
blue
Ocean?
ocean? Yeah.
Well, it begins with the industry context. If you have 2 or 3 players that are very strong and you're not, you have to do something different. If you're, in India, we used to have growth. When the whole market is growing, it's not as stressful. It's now that, the market is more, or in the West, a lot of markets are mature. So if you're a new player, then it's very difficult. I mean, look at telecom in India. We had 5 or 6 players, and slowly they've come down to 2.5. So if I wanted to go into telecom at the moment, I would have to really think of doing something very, very different.
All right.
But it's really, you have to understand the industry context. What is the market? Who are your competitors? But you don't use the competitors to create new situations. So if there is space in the market for you to play, you go in. Otherwise, you might need to think of something. So it could be more design thinking-y, or it be more blue ocean strategy. But there is a point of intersection between the two approaches.
Thank you, George. That brings us to the end of the session, and I personally enjoy speaking to you.
No, it's good. I have to practice doing this, because that's going to be the future. It's not going to be in a hotel room.
Process. And those of the participants who have joined us today over this exciting conversations, thank you so much.